The average selling price for us is just a hair under 50 bucks each. The biggest factor about these though is that 98% of the time, nearly all of the time, I'm not paying a dime for them. And they do sell regularly. I have in-house right now almost 65 of these that we were able to get, again, for free. Hey, it's Don. Today we're going to talk about something that I've messed with for probably heading on 30 years now. Something that routinely, honestly, can get me right about the $50 mark, just a hair under, but right about the $50 mark. Sometimes these can sell for 100 bucks up to $150. Now the biggest factor in this item is that I almost never pay a dime for it. I mean, literally almost never. Now, I have quite a few of them as well. I have space these days. We did buy our own building from reselling stuff just like this. And, you know, there's a bunch of them available. It's something that we've been digging into for, geez, 25, 30 years at this point. Now, what am I talking about? Well, let's talk about a haul item here first. I saw an ad on Facebook Marketplace for some records, and this isn't about records what we're talking about at all today. So, but the record deal is what brought me to this. So anyway, I saw some records, went back and forth, realized the record deal was 2 hours in one direction away. Couldn't see them all. It was a take them all or leave them all. When I started to say, hey, look, you're quite a distance, they told me I could have them for free. All these records, and it was, you know, 40, 50 boxes totes worth of records there, which was just, you know, a lot of records. It was still 4+ hours worth of my day, you know, just to get 3,400 or so records at a shot. So it's a couple trips, hours worth of time. Now the pictures shown, and here they are, didn't show much in the records aspect of it, but what I did see was worth 800, 1,000 bucks very, very, very easily. And again, they're free. Not the only time. Most of the time they're free, as I said. Now what are we talking about? We're talking about the milk crates that the records were in. I get records all the time, especially 78 records. Now these milk crates won't hold an LP, so 90% of the time, when I'm out buying 78 records, I'm grabbing up the totes that they're in too. Milk crates that they're in. Now, who's gonna mess with milk crates? That's what I thought 30 years ago, but you know, these days I know better than that. You know, I don't know anybody, honestly, who does mess with milk crates besides one other record person that I personally know. Other than that, I've never even broached the subject with somebody. I've never heard anybody else mention it or anything else like that. So it's an insider. There's not much competition in these as of this point. There's so many different varieties and so many of these available out in the public for almost nothing that you would be surprised. Now, we're going to look up a couple, so we're going to show you a couple that I do have in-house that have sales history. For the most part, the majority do sell. There's a very high sell-through rate for the earlier vintage ones across the board. They're not super, super rare to some extent, but maybe some of the brands or the locations that they're from do not show up very often. It's a small town. These were made by, you know, a local company most of the time. There are some national companies, but shipping and stuff on these, you got to take into factor. So there's local companies all over. There's vintage styling. There's vintage ones from, say, this one right here, which says Village Meats, Norcross, Georgia, for Wendy's ground beef. So this is for Wendy's. There's McDonald's. I've seen Disneyland versions of these. Now, again, I get them free with records, and not just records, but I have seen them with tools in them. I've seen them with tile in them. I've seen them with, you know, actual milk and stuff like that in them. When I worked in the restaurant industry, the produce vendors sometimes showed up with these. Definitely the milk and the dairy deliveries and stuff like that did as well. And many times they would have bought out another company or bought some of these somewhere else, and they might have another company. They might trash some of these out. So I've been grabbing up some of these for quite some time. Geez, almost 30 years ago was the first couple we got. If you look them up, you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, again, people are going to say, well, they're huge. They weigh a lot, and on and on. You can ship one of these for under 5 pounds. They fit in a 14-inch cube box. You double box them, it's still under 5 pounds. Very easy. You don't need a ton of cushion in there if you double box them. You know, you just don't want anything snapping them. And you may think, oh, they're going to hold up. Well, some of the older ones may not. They may be fragile. So you want to be a little careful with some of these. These date back to the very, very, very late 59 or so from what I've seen. I know in the 60s they were more prevalent, 70s they were everywhere, 80s and on. So now some of the ones I'm showing you are from the very early 60s in this aspect of it. We'll look at some more, as I said, but most of the time they're with the records. What I saw on Facebook Marketplace to say, hey, it's worth me driving 4 hours down there, even if I don't know how good the records are, because in this case, the totes, the milk crates themselves were on the border of $1,000 worth of sellable value. There were over 50 of these I picked up. I asked them how many there were. Their return was 45 to 50 or better, and there was. And this isn't the only ones I've picked up. I've picked them at other hauls. You've seen them in other videos. So I'm doing double pickup here for free whenever I pick up records like this, because the totes that they're in will also get me money. I could throw away all the records and still make $800 to $1,000 just off the totes. Just off the totes. Now there's other sizes of totes. We'll look at one in just a minute here that they put LPs in. And it's, you know, dateable, it's knowable, the whole works. You'll see a bunch of different names on these. Most all of these are different named companies. I've got more behind it. You can see another row of 3. So again, I've got them all over the place. They are great for 78s. That's why people pick them up. The biggest takeaway on these is that you want the ones that say it's a crime to possess them. Now I say that because that dates them. It's like the Internal Revenue tax paid labels on old beer bottles when you had to pay the tax and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So if you've ever sold old beer bottles, labels, or anything else like that, you know darn well what I'm talking about. This is the same principle, the warning on there. There's philatelic items, stamp-related items, and things like that that have warnings on them, like official stamps and things like that, so you can't possess them. But, you know, they are in stamp collections. They are things that people do possess. Most of these are all dead stock, meaning that none of the companies that you'll see on here are active anymore. So none of the warnings mean a single thing. When the place went out of business, you could easily just take some acetone and it would remove the paint and you wouldn't be able to see it, and they could paint something else over it. They would reuse these because you could get these, you know, used ones for at least half the cost you could of having a new one made. Get a stencil made and put your name on it if that's what you wanted to do. So there's a bunch of different varieties and versions. The small town ones are the ones that are probably harder to come by, and some of those can go for some good money. Harder to come by because they were made custom. Every one of the ones that I've seen has a company name, you know, actually impressed into the plastic into it. Probably after the actual crate itself was pressed and made. That was then put in. That way no one could just steal them. So none of the ones that I've ever run into were just blank unless they were made just for, you know, for retail, for regular people to just have them buy, which there are some of those as well too. Again, you can see all the different names. Some of the newer ones, how to tell age on some of these is color, the design. Some of the newer ones have more plastic, more waffling, I would call it, up on here for more support. Sometimes the shape of the handle is different. There's hundreds of companies that made these. I've seen at least probably 100 on my own different companies. I probably have 60 different companies in-house possibly right now. So, you know, you gotta, you know, think that that isn't the huge factor. It's where they're from. Dairy collectors, people that collect dairy bottles and things like that do collect them. There's people that have soda shops and stuff in their basement, and I've seen vintage milk crates in those as well. So there's a million different reasons these display well. They're usable. They can put things in them. I've seen, again, I've said contractors use these and vintage ones many times. They'll go to a flea market or a auction or something and grab some. Sometimes they have tools in them. I've been to estate sales and garage sales where people were taking all the tools out of the tote and just going to leave it. They didn't care about the actual, I say tote, but the crates. And they left it. And I was able to get it for $2 or something. You know, they're crazy cheap if you got to buy them. If you're buying a bin full of records or something, you ask how much for the records, what would you take for that crate of records over there? $30, boom, off you go. The crate itself may be worth $30. The records, who cares sometimes? It's not always the records. In this case, the records were really, really good. The records themselves, there was some rare ones in there. There was some speeds for the records I've never even seen or heard of, that it's not acknowledged speeds and stuff. Some very pricey stuff was in here too, including some original French discs, some from many different countries and things like that. So I scored out on both aspects of it. Now, people say, well, how would somebody ever give all of that away for free? Well, they picked it up for free. They were going to resell it. It turns out, you know, they didn't tell me they were a business to resell. It turns out at the end of the day that they did auctions out there. A friend of theirs had them in the basement. They'd been in there since the 80s or something. That's what it looks like as well. They picked them up and realized it was a lot more work. They don't know all the ins and outs and what other sites you need to look up. Most of these types of records you won't find on eBay. You'll see one-off sales maybe every 3 years maybe, but that's about it. Large chunks of these types of records, you'll have to look on other sites, which I've talked about in other videos. We're not going to delve into that, but they didn't know any of the ins and outs, and they didn't even look through probably 95% of these. They gave up long before that because the value wasn't there. I found some good stuff even from the 50s in here, like Ricky Nelson and stuff. If they had looked through it, they would have no way left those type of records in there, because those are $50. Fats Domino and Ricky Nelson, Bobby Vinton, and even some promos. It looks like there's some radio station records just all over the place in here. So all told, we added in around 12,078 records into inventory this week alone. And we spent less than $200 on them. I have some gas invested and things like that, but anyway. Now we'll look at some more of these, and I'll show you some sales here on eBay. As you can see on eBay, there is track record of them selling. Most people, if you ask around, no one's ever thought to even look these up. Ever. No one looks up milk crates. No one thinks milk crates are worth any money. Just like some of the packing boxes, the wooden boxes that I've got. Just like wooden boxes for like eggs and food that I run into that have records in them, and I grab those with the records. Sometimes those cardboard boxes can get you some good money. A vintage beer box we've acquired on several different occasions that had 45 records in them, and the beer box itself was worth $75 to $100. Milk crates are a no-brainer because they're almost always free. They're a tangible item. They display well. Anybody who collects dairy bottles and things is going to like these, because glass bottles did sit in these as well. They were originally designed for glass bottles. Now here's a great example of one right here. This one's from the 60s. This is a larger one, as you can see, and this was used to hold 12-inch records, LPs. That's what you'll see all the time. There's a ton of these type out there. You can tell it's early by the steel band around the top. This dates it to the mid to late 60s into the very early 70s. Here's a sold on eBay for this exact same one. This one weighed less than 7 pounds with the extra weight and the steel on it. Now, you'll see some too, like this one right here. You can't read what it says, but it has printing on it. If you're unaware, many times they came unprinted with any, colored text. Just like this one here, someone took a paintbrush and painted the company name into the grooves. Now, the name is actually impressed into these. So even on these, it has a name. So if you're careful, you can just rub paint across the top and boom, there you go. White or yellow paint is about all you need. There's another one down there. Their names are there. All it needs is painting. And it's very common to run into these where it's painted, just like some people do with like vintage soda bottles, soda shop bottles, and things like that. They run into these in barns and garages all the time. It's an easy item. It doesn't have to have records, but I do find records in these probably at least 70% of the ones that I haul, 75% of the ones of these milk crates that I haul, all have records in them. Now, it was a crime, and it still is a crime to use these for things that aren't, what they're for, but these are all defunct businesses. These are long since out of production and long since out of use in the modern scheme of things, the designs and everything. Most of them aren't going to be dated, but you will run into some that have dates in the 60s and into the 70s. Usually the newer ones, I don't see dates because it doesn't seem to matter. They made some of these into the millions, but the smaller companies, that's why, they're collectible, because smaller companies, they may have only run 50, 100 crates, and that's it. So they're scarce. There's not a huge collector market, but most of the people who collect dairy and milk collectibles and things like that will want them. Even farm ones. I've seen John Deere crates. Most of the main restaurants who were around in the 40s and 50s and 60s, there's various versions of these. There's some actual metal versions that look almost identical to this that are metal. Those are earlier, but the plastic ones are the ones I almost always can get for free. Well, there you have it. Hopefully that really seriously gives you something to think about. This is outside the wheelhouse for most people. This is far outside the box. For probably 98% of those folks that I talked to wouldn't have a clue or think about messing with these, or they looked up one and thought, oh, that one's not worth anything. They're probably all not worth anything. But anyway, that's what I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit that like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified if I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell all your friends.
When I was a kid, the closest you could get me to a fish was the aquarium. Now, thanks to McDonald's, I'm the expert. You see, most fish is not government inspected, but all McDonald's fish is U.S. government inspected grade A. And it's all prime white filet. No fish cakes, not ground up, not mixed with other fish. It's a filet of fish. The best-selling fish sandwich in America.
Tell him your nickname, Henry.
They call me Jaws.
Quality you can taste.